I'd like to call to order our special board meeting work session and executive session. Mr. Tornello, can you please call the roll?
Mrs. Bear,
Here.
Mr. DeFranco,
Here.
Mrs. Verdi,
Here.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Here.
Mrs. Menser.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Do I hear a motion to approve our agenda?
Madam
Madam-
President, go ahead.
Madam President, I'd like to motion for approval.
Do I hear a second?
Madam President, I'll second approval of agenda.
Discussion? Mr. Tornello?
Mrs. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco,
Yes.
Mrs. Verdi,
Yes.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Menser.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Mr. Tornello, you're up.
All right. You'll notice that this month's financials are actually not a consent agenda vote just because of the amount of items we have. That would have been a consent vote. There was only like 2, so we just did individual votes for this meeting. To try to do the May financials in June, we thought we'd do them this month instead of doing 2 in a row in July. But so our revenues are in line with our estimates to date, as well as what we've collected last year. Our property taxes and our PUP were collected about 102% each of what we expected. We still only received 50% of our homestead rollback, as we have not yet received the second payment of the year. However, we did receive it in the month of June. And we did receive our CKLA curriculum reimbursement from the state of Ohio, and that can be seen in receipt code 3219. And we also have a higher receipt code 5300 due to the safety grants and ESSER grant wrap-up. Any charges from the general fund that happened in the prior year are moved and coded to that line. Expenditures are below our estimates, but they are above where they were last year, and this is due to the 1.99% negotiated raise and the 38% increase in healthcare, and our ESSER funds beginning to go back to the general fund this year. So they started to phase back in this year, and then they'll be fully extinguished for next year. Our salaries are in line with our estimates, and June will have an increase as supplemental contracts that were not spread were paid in the first pay of June. And then all debt payments from the general fund have been paid for. Any advances will be addressed in the month of June as part of the fiscal year end process. So that's what we are in the middle of right now in the treasurer's office, trying to get all of those entries done and the books closed, as tomorrow is the last day, well, the last working day of the fiscal year end for fiscal 24. And all line items have been reviewed and adjusted during the month of June, like I said, during the fiscal year end process. And in Fund 006, the Food Service Fund, we, to date, which was a couple weeks ago, we lost about $18,000 year to date. However, it's good because Chartwell's, with the new contract, guaranteed at least a profit of $225,000. So we shouldn't be seeing a loss in, at least for the next year or so when we are using Chartwell's.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve 3A financial report for month ending May 31st, 2024?
Madam President, I make a motion to approve item 3A.
Do I hear a second?
Madam President, I'll second.
Discussion? Mr. Tornello?
Mrs. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco,
Yes.
Mrs. Verdi,
Yes.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Menser.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Dr. Ward?
Yeah, well, hello, everybody, and to those joining us from home virtually. I would like to just take a minute and kind of highlight why we're voting at a special meeting and work session. I think it's off the norm, it's different than normal, so it's nice to kind of provide that background for those that are tuning in. There's 2 big kind of driving purposes today for why we're kind of adding this to the agenda today. The first is that there are time-sensitive items on the agenda today that expire at the end of the month, before July 1, one of which we're going to take into consideration in a moment, item 4A. And so, approving the last contract for WESEP tonight, so we can roll into July 1 and with a new contract for the next 2 years. The second is out of a courtesy of our fellow districts. And so we're recommending a middle school principal tonight, and we're recommending a director for teaching and learning. And the districts where these people are coming from need to find a replacement before July 10th, because after July 10th, public employees typically are held in the contract that they're under. And so, out of courtesy to these districts, to give them time to replace the people that we have so graciously selected and will onboard to lead our work, today was a really crucial day. So thank you for making that accommodation, because it is off the norm. So given that, 4A would be the ratification of the WESEP agreement. This would be our fourth and final contract. I want to thank Nancy, like I've thanked all of our union presidents for working with the district. I mean, Nancy, she bleeds Willoughby East Lake pride. She cares deeply about this district, and she was able to balance the needs of her members with the priorities and needs of the district. And that makes us really unique when you look around the region. We have 4 really strong union presidents who advocate very well, but also are willing to work with us. And that collaborative spirit makes this place special. So thank you for that.
Do I hear a motion to approve 4A, ratification of the tentative agreement with the Willoughby East Lake Classified Professionals, WESUP?
Madam President, I move to approve 4A, ratification of the tentative agreement with WESEP.
Do I hear a second?
Madam President, I'll second.
Discussion?
I'm excited we have our last one done.
Mr. Tarnello?
Mrs. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco,
Yes.
Mrs. Verdi,
Yes.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Menser.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
So item 4B would be memorandum of understanding between WESEP and the district with regards to those teachers at Sale who give up and forfeit their lunch. They're compensated for that to service some kids. We've approved this before, as you'll find it on the agenda today.
Do I hear a motion to approve 4B, memorandum of agreement with Willoughby East Lake, WESUP?
Madam President, I motion to approve item 4B.
Do I hear a second?
Madam President, I'll second.
Discussion? Mr. Tarnello?
Mrs. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco,
Yes.
Mrs. Verdi,
Yes.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Menser.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
So item 4C would be another memorandum of understanding between WESEP and the district. This addresses part-time insurance, and it's associated with the contract that we just voted on 2 items ago.
Do I hear a motion to approve 4C, memorandum of agreement with WESUP?
Madam President, I motion to approve 4C.
Do I hear a second?
Madam President, I'll second 4C.
Discussion? Mr. Tarnello?
Mrs. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco,
Yes.
Mrs. Verdi,
Yes.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Menser.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And then lastly, item 4D is the Director of Teaching and Learning and Innovation. It's the salary schedule. This position assures the unrelenting focus on teaching and learning. We've paid for this position through attrition and savings and rethinking about the dollars and savings we have. And it's an investment from our perspective in assuring that the systems and structures that we've been talking about all year are put into place and are able to assure that our students in Willoughby East Lake are learning. We have a really solid candidate for this. This would be one of those people that we're going to give our neighbor district some courtesy time to find a replacement, should you, accept that recommendation. So that's 4D.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve 4D, Director, Teaching, Learning, and Innovation salary schedule?
Madam President, I move to approve 4D, Director, Teaching, Learning, and Innovation salary schedule.
Do I hear a second?
Madam President, I second 4D.
Discussion?
I'm just really glad that we are rethinking things and reallocating resources so that at no net additional cost to the district, we're able to really prioritize what we said we're going to prioritize. And I think this shows how serious we are, and the quality and caliber of the candidate who we're able to attract shows me that we are showing to everyone how serious we are about this. So I'm very excited.
I appreciate the administration having a very thorough conversation, answering all of my questions prior to placing it on the agenda.
Thank you. Mr. Tarnello?
Mrs. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco,
Yes.
Mrs. Verdi,
Yes.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Menser.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
And lastly, item 5A, the personnel agenda. You'll see for your approval tonight, Jim Green is named the Willoughby Middle School principal. Jim comes from Cleveland Metro with over 10 years of administrative experience. He's worked to improve outcomes, to build morale, to create a culture that is collaborative. He emerged through a very robust search as the most qualified candidate to fit our needs in Willoughby Eastlake. He could not be here tonight because he's out of town. Matter of fact, all of our candidates are, given the time of year. But we will certainly bring him, to meet you in August. Item B there is Katie Nagy from Kirtland. She is the K-5 elementary principal and curriculum specialist for that district. She's worked very hard at implementing the CKLA curriculum in Kirtland, so much so that they're 2 years ahead, and people have visited Kirtland to see model implementation. Why is that important to us? Because we just approved a pretty hefty curriculum in May that happens to be the same one. So she has that expertise. She's absolutely a people-first, relationship-oriented individual, and she was absolutely just thrilled to even be considered for the opportunity to lead this important work moving in the next chapter. So those would be the two recommendations you see. And then the last one's Zach Weegley's resignation, which we'll act on tonight. As you know, Zach has spent the year driving over an hour and 10 minutes every day to give his time to the work that we are able to say now we're in a position to launch. And so I won't be here in July to personally thank him. He's going to be sitting here at that meeting to practice for being superintendent. But just know how grateful I am for his service to Willoughby Eastlake. I would call him one of the most distinguished colleagues I've worked with and a great friend. So his resignation is for your consideration as well.
Thank you. Do I hear a motion to approve 5A, administrative personnel?
Madam
Madam-
Pres, we like all wait and then we all go.
Go.
at the same time.
I was about to go to.
Go ahead.
Madam President, I make a motion to approve item 5A, administrative personnel.
Do I hear a second?
Madam President, I'll second.
Discussion? Mr. Tornillo?
Mrs. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco,
Yes.
Mrs. Verdi,
Yes.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Menser.
Yes.
Motion carries 5-0.
Moving on to 6A, policy discussions.
I just have to say that pause probably gives Zach a little pause too. Because if you don't let him out, he'd have to rethink this whole career path. So
I was about to
considered
say that,
saying
and then
no.
I was like, that would be weird, right?
So we're talking about, we're just spending some time unpacking the idea tonight of two policy considerations and conversations. And the first one pertains to cell phones in the district. And so as a point of background on cell phones, I have the current policy that we have on the books. And as we prepare for this discussion, it's important to note that this policy, as written, does two things. One, it satisfies the requirement in House Bill 250. So House Bill 250 in May, the governor rolled out, he said schools have to have a policy in place that addresses cell phone use in schools. We have that policy in place, so there is a pretty wide policy that you can take a look at here. So with regards to fulfilling that particular mandate, we're in good shape. The policy, I think when you read it too, it's pretty well written. I mean, there's definitely a dial here we can turn left to right with regards to cell phone use in schools. And so we'll talk a little bit about that tonight. What is the appropriate approach as we look at cell phones? This has been a very collaborative year. We've engaged our stakeholders around all topics of importance. We've surveyed parents, we've talked to students. And so you'll hear tonight my recommendation, although I'm passionate about cell phones and their impact in a learning environment, that not being consistent with how we've modeled a collaborative approach this year probably wouldn't be the most wise approach. And so we'll look at the policy tonight. I'm interested to hear your feedback on it. And then my recommendation will be that we use the existing policy and engage in some building level collaboration this year around how do we help our students make sure that they connect with human beings and that these things don't become the distraction that ultimately causes some of the other problems that we're solving. We can talk about appropriateness at different levels tonight from your perspective. I'd be interested in your take. And then ultimately, there's multiple ways we can approach this work. And I'd love to see some really aggressive pilots next year that allow for us to take cell phones out of the school for a period of time and then ask students what that was like and ask parents what that's like, collect that feedback. Cell phone free lunch week, cell phone free classrooms. But all that is already possible by this policy, right? So I'll send that down the road. At the end of the night, this is less about cell phones to me. It's more about creating distraction-free learning environments and protecting the well-being of our kids. We know that there's a lot of research right now out there on the link potentially emerging between cell phones and some things, but it is a understudied area in the research. Did I send you my notes too?
Oh,
Probably?
yeah, sorry.
Katie's resume, that's great.
I was like, what am I doing?
Sorry about that. So we know that when you look at the research, there's some anecdotal connections between, depression increases. There's anecdotal evidence around suicidal ideation in kids. There's anecdotal evidence that supports anxiety and depression, in particularly with females and girls, is up. And so that research is out there. We know it's there. What we're trying to do is again, be mindful of what we're learning, but also create an environment where we're dialed in on being distraction-free and connected to each other, right? And so I think there's a good way to do that. I don't think knee-jerk reaction is ever the best when we tell people how it's going to be. I think when we do it with people and we survey our stakeholders, see where they're at, and we use all of that feedback to do something appropriate for our kids is probably the best move. But I'm going to be quiet for a minute and listen, take some notes, because as the leadership body and the governance structure, you help set the direction that will guide the work for the year. So thanks for listening, and I'm going to turn my cell phone over because it was just a prop today.
So one of the things that I wanted to speak to that happened in the legislature was Mike DeWine at one point, or Governor DeWine at one point, had expressed an interest in potentially setting a policy that said no cell phones and just mandating that. And there was a lot of pushback because people said we should answer that question at the local level with our communities and think through it and figure it out with our communities and represent our communities. So I'll tell you, just like personally, as a mom of a 9-year-old, which is like biased, I personally would love to take all cell phones away. Like, I don't want to give my child doesn't have a cell phone right now. She has a flip phone for the bus because I'm paranoid in case of emergencies, but she does not have a smartphone. She thinks I'm the mean mom because I don't give it to her. So I am on like one end of the pendulum. But I also know that when we're up here, we can't just act on our own personal beliefs, right? And we have to really represent all of our constituents. And I can say, honestly, I don't feel like I have my finger on the pulse of what our community really has the exact appetite for. And so it really resonates with me about, as much as I do want to move towards getting as strict as we can be without overcorrecting, and then collaborating with our community is what feels like it makes a lot of sense to me at this point.
Yeah, I've had a conversation with a lot of friends in the district that I thought they don't allow their kids tablets, nothing. But like you, they have flip phones. And I was like, I don't want phones, period, nothing. But surprise, turned out that they were on the fence of saying that they would rather them stay in the district, because what if something does happen, just like you, so there's a fine line when it comes to having them and not having them, so it's a fine line.
You got that right.
I definitely think we should gather some data from the community to see where parents and guardians stand. I'm in agreement that they should not be used in the classroom unless for a specific reason, like a calculator or something, the teacher needs them to use them, but I'm not necessarily in agreement with saying you can't have a cell phone at all, not even in your book bag, can't have it on property. I think that's a bit overreach.
So, I think soliciting opinions from parents is crucial. I think soliciting information from our students and also our staff. But I think there's a step that we might be forgetting that requires consideration. I think we need to first build honest awareness around the impact of cell phones in our local schools at this time first, so we all have the same information to then take that information and give an opinion back about next steps. So I have a child in high school, middle school, and elementary. So I span all age groups. And cell phones present a unique asset and hurdle at each level. And when I sat and spoke with my children who don't have cell phones, My daughter, by the way, had the mean mom too. She didn't have a cell phone this year. She's almost 13 and just got one, but it's highly restricted. And we sat down and talked about it, and she's like, I wish more moms would be like that because I know how much this impacts my friends. I see now that I have access to it, it's starting to impact me. But she was at a mature enough age to have that conversation with me where she started to realize that her personality, the way she was feeling about herself was changing when she had access to this device for the last 2 months. And we said, well, let's talk about that. We don't need to have access to these ways. We don't need to have these things. But I think before we can give an opinion, we have to be fully informed to then give an opinion based on the current state of our schools and impact on phones. Because if we just generically ask for opinions, they'll be coming from an authentic place, but it might not be a fully informed place.
So are you saying maybe something like a town hall or a coffee talk or something where we educate on what research we know and sort of talk about what we do or what we recommend and then follow that up with soliciting the input? Or are you thinking something different?
I would require assistance, but I think we need to first maybe speak with our administrators and say, this year, how many incidents that were negative in the school were initiated because of cell phone use, whether that is inappropriate communications between students or staff, inappropriate use of a phone, and then look at those and aggregate what are the most common forms of inappropriate use of cell phone. Do we have evidence to support that this is district-wide? Is it age group specific? How does it elevate and differentiate in high school? So what I can say is this, my high schooler does not use the bathroom in high school. And he runs in the door every day. I know what he's doing. And I ask, like, what is wrong with you? He's like, Mom, people use their cell phones in the bathroom and they'll video you going to the bathroom. That is not going to be the same situation in the elementary school where they're not allowed to have the phone in their hands. So I think we need to have some really honest conversations at a building level first, using our evidence that we have with our incident reporting and try to find some trends. And then from there, speak to the staff and say, what are the things that are maybe not reportable or actionable for behavior or policy violation that you're still dealing with? And then I think we need to have the same conversation with the kids to say, what do we not know that's happening with phones, that's happening with phones?
Yes.
And then take that information and say, this is local data and facts. I mean, we can get as much, research stuff from people, and our kids and staff and parents have said this. What do we do next? Now give an opinion. And I think that might be an important step first.
I also wonder, I'd be interested to know the feedback from the teachers, because I would think that this could be a big, have been potential challenges in many classrooms across our district. And I'd like to hear from them and their own personal testimonies and, critique on this, to get their input. So I'd like to put that in the mix as well, because they're directly affected with trying to teach the kids. And I'm curious to see that, but I think that your idea, as far as that goes, is very, very, very good. To give people concrete data. This is why we need to do thus and such, as far as these phones go. We're finding, A, B, and C on it, and then therefore we could do that with confidence without just opinions right off the bat.
And even making sure that teachers are staying off their phones, because I've been told multiple times that there's teachers that are on their phones, not just from my own daughter, from friends' kids. So there's that we have to hone in, I think, on as well.
So I think that's important, is what is our current practice? Because our policy, and this is all of our policies, enable us to make a series of decisions in our practices, right? So this policy says, at least at the high school level, that at the teacher's discretion, a cell phone can be used in a class. Now, it says for an educational purpose, so it's possible that someone can be on their cell phone. Now, we could still have a practice that even though we say you can do that, that's not what we do, and we can deal with that at the handbook level or the administrative guideline level. So I think doing a thorough analysis of what are we actually doing now, making sure that's consistent from building to building at the different grade bands would be a good step one as we're collecting this data before we make any drastic changes, probably to what we're
Yes.
doing, is to assess
Exactly.
what we're doing, how is it working, and
Yes.
then we're educating at the same time, providing those outside resources about what are we doing, what does the research show us, what have other people done, what are they finding, and then synthesize that probably over the course of a year or maybe half a year, or however long it takes to.
Yeah, so this is great insight. This gives me some really good kind of formula and first steps kind of for this work. I think engaging the administrative team and doing an analysis of what's going on is really important. Their voice is going to be important because they're going to tell you the truth because they deal with the front line all the time. That's a really important start. I think engaging and collecting data, both qualitative and quantitative, that gives us a sense for, how are those infractions that we're addressing in the building, also related to or linked to cell phones. Very helpful insight. So I think I would say, within 9 weeks, the first quarter, we can probably gather that data. And then by the semester time, we'd be able to present the report and with some action steps for what we should do. In the meantime, I would recommend we do some, cell phone free weeks. We pilot, in the environment and ecosystem of our school, what it would be like, and we get kids, beginning to practice the habits that we're going to ultimately hold them to. Because the worst thing you can do is put a policy in place that's not enforced consistently, because then you're going to hear the things I've heard for my entire career, which is, you don't enforce tardies or something would be an example, right? And so if we're thoughtful about it and we make the adjustments and we calibrate as a team, and we should educate our community about social media and cell phones and give people information. And then they could do with it whatever they want, but to provide that information I think would be helpful.
I had a conversation this year in conferences with a bunch of teachers at the high school level, and I'm very aware of who my children are, including my high schooler, and we had discussed cell phone use. I also have something on that tells me what the peak times are for cell phone use, and I'm like, why is that at 10 o'clock every day? This is not okay. But there was a good reason for that, and that is, in the class, the teacher was leveraging cell phones to demonstrate how different search queries in Google are capturing information and returning different responses. That's a little bit of that AI. So I think there's some really valid places where, the phone is a tool for a variety of things. And I think that might be a secondary offshoot, obviously, at the administrative or operational level, is what are our expectations and best practices for use of cell phones with supporting curriculum. And I think we need to disclose that to parents as well so that they know your child will be using a phone in my class and this is how they will use it. I know I, as a parent, would like that because when I sat my son down, I'm like, why is it always 10 o'clock? Your cell phone use increases, you are in school. And he's like, well, we use it in this class. And I'm like, When I talked to the teacher, I knew. So
What is the year on that policy? I'm sorry, I don't have it in front of me.
17.
So it's interesting, the history there, building on that a little bit, a lot of these policies were written before districts were one-to-one, right? And so the cell phone was the only way kids could connect, when they had one, because we didn't hand a device to every kid, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Now we are one-to-one, and so unless you're doing those unique kind of lessons that require the cell phone, we have the tools now in the classroom to do those more important things. So that's another thing that's not accounted for in a policy written in 2017. That was pre-one-to-one. So there's probably very few instances where you would need a cell phone for what's going on in the classroom anymore. But to know that for sure, we got to ask, right? And so I think that's a prudent step. So definitely this is good. This is a good project. Someone on my cabinet is going to be so happy to have the chance to lead this work, and they're going to grow and develop and learn. But also I think the whole team will benefit from this conversation.
what I wanted to also put out there is I think it's really important that we invite parents into the fact that this conversation is occurring so that if you get a cell phone free week, there are parents who are very concerned that their children are in schools for a variety of reasons.
For
There
sure.
have been very unsafe situations they want their child to have a phone, period. And they have a right to feel that way based on actual events. But I think it's important maybe at our orientations this year, kindergarten orientation, middle schools, high school, as well as just those days for stop and drops, where we give out a document that says the district is currently evaluating cell phone use. We will be communicating with you regularly as we address this. Something to that effect. You need to invite parents in so that they're not calling and screaming at administrators, why did you take my child's phone away during lunch today?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken. Anything we do is in partnership with our parents, always.
Yeah.
Like, that is really important for anything to go successfully, right? If you're gonna do something well, you've gotta do it in partnership, you gotta communicate a lot. And so we have ways, like, we always do our welcome back safety letter, talking about, making good choices in schools, review the code of conduct with your students. That's a good place, the sweet spot for that in August. And then we'll develop a good plan to keep the message out front. So this is great. I will certainly put a plan together, and we'll get the data we need to make the best decision for our students and our community.
Just one caveat to all of this, and I know it's written into our policy and will continue to be part of any policy, that if someone needs a device for a medical reason or a learning aid that's in an IEP or something, that's never gonna be something that we would, ban, eliminate, or anything like that, so.
Like if they're diabetic and they're taking their
Correct.
readings on their phone through the app.
Correct, yes, and that's specifically called out in this policy and in any
Yeah.
model policies I've seen.
I think where policy clashes with humanity is when you look at each child, each family, each circumstance, and you do what's right for kids. And that we're really good in Willoughby Eastlake at that after a year of analysis. Like, we take every situation and every kid and every family, and we do what's best to make sure that child can learn. And it's really something that we should all be proud of, quite frankly. So I second that.
Hey, you got to second something.
Finally.
Yes. Or is it still the same item? It's still
The
6A.
same- It's the same item.
Oh, man. Are you guys ready for this? You might fall asleep. The only person that might be energized is John Roskus.
And this whole time, I
Well,
thought
now
you were
I'm gonna-
doing this to wow us.
Now I'm gonna take a lot of notes and ask questions.
All right. You take notes and ask questions. So we're going to do an overview of everything Willoughby Eastlake in terms of finances, all the way down to reappraisals, what that looks like, and we're going to try to just get the entire picture of Willoughby Eastlake. So we always talk about different funds, and the general fund, the 001 fund, that's the one we always talk about, but there are other funds. You can see I just picked a few from the cash summary report.
So the 001 is the one we always see on the 5-year forecast.
Yes.
Thank you.
And then talk about how I know they're honeycombs or whatever, but how are those honeycombs filled? But I call buckets. So the 500 level funds, everything with 5 in the front, that's a federal fund. And that is based on how many students you have and the students' demographics. So 516 is based on students with special needs. 572 is based on students that are considered economically disadvantaged, things of that nature. 006 food service is also a federal fund, however, that generates revenue through breakfast and lunches that are served, in addition to cash-paying students. State funding or state funds would be your 400 funds. That could be anything from safety grants to buses to adult education.
So like when we just got that safety grant, that goes into like a 400 fund?
Yes.
Okay.
That would have
Thanks.
a 4 in the front, yes. And then state funding also partially funds the 001 general fund, and that, is from the state of Ohio. So you have the Fair School Funding Formula, that's based on your students' demographics and your taxpayers' ability to pay. And also, they pay the 12.5% from the homestead rollback on all levies passed prior to 2012. That's why it is crucial to continue to pass those levies, because the local taxpayers are only paying 87.5% of those levies. However, every levy passed after 2012, they're paying 100% of.
And that happens automatically, right? Before they get their property tax bill. And that's why there's this like huge, so I was watching earlier today, like the commissioners meeting where they were talking about the tax budget and the auditor was talking and saying, we keep hearing this number like 29%, 30%. But that's not necessarily, that's the amount that property values are going up. That's not necessarily the amount someone's individual property taxes are going up, and there's a lot of reasons for that. One is the effective tax rate, but another can be this homestead and rollback. So like what you're actually gonna see on your property tax bill, you're minusing out all of these things, like the inflationary factors, the homestead and rollback, and people are that's all happening before they're getting their tax bill, correct? And then
Right.
we get the rebate to us.
So the county auditor will determine how much the levy is to generate, assess 87.5% to the tax base, and charge the state of Ohio for 12.5%. So
Thank you.
they do that calculation prior to issuing tax bills.
Thank you.
Then local funds, you have the general fund, which is funded through general operating levies, an 002 fund, which is your bond retirement, so that would be for buildings, which would be the two high schools and like Longfellow. 003, that would be permanent improvement, that would be our PI levy. The 018 principal fund, that's usually through donations and fundraising. 035 severance, we usually make a transfer from the general fund over to severance. That is to ensure that we have enough funds to pay the severance for our staff. And then the 200 funds are student-led activity accounts. Those are fundraisers, and 300 are school-led student accounts, and that would be like your athletics. And those are generated through ticket revenue and fundraisers. So that's a kind of an overview of those funds. And then just want to re-highlight what our previous levy cycle looked like prior to May of '23. And then this is what it looks like now. So,
Are you gonna go over the different types of
Oh, yeah.
levies? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so I'm jumping the gun
You
if
were
I'm
jumping the
asking.
gun.
Okay. Sorry.
it's going to be a lengthy one.
I wanna know all about the types of levies.
Oh yeah, they're all we're going to be going all over everything. So we don't see another levy until November of '28, but that's for a renewal. So, you know, it's not a new money issue; it's a renewal based on this current levy cycle. So I just wanted to reiterate what this is, and then also kind of wanted to give a little history about Willoughby Eastlake, because history tends to repeat itself, but we're trying to prevent history from repeating itself. So Pat sent a great article. It's Bust to Boom. Not boom to bust. Bust to boom. And
It was like a scanned-in paper article.
Oh,
That was the best
old
part.
school, 1983. I didn't want to rescan it in and type it all out, but it was eerily similar to where we were just a few years ago. 2011, 2012, we had a levy that failed in 2011, and as a result, we entered into fiscal caution. Buildings were falling apart, could not certify union contracts, 90 people were laid off, increased health insurance premiums, 2 years of pay freezes, unpaid furlough days, closed McKinley. Treasurer Cliff Reinhardt, this is before Bill Parkinson, he remarked, "We're alive, but we are not healthy." This is after the levy did pass. And Eastlake Power Plant closed, which resulted in a loss of $1.8 million per year as a result of the elimination of the public utility property tax. So that was a dark time in Willoughby Eastlake. That is also right around when Dr. Thompson became the superintendent. So he came into this, he didn't cause it, he came in during this time. And then the next time was about 8 years later. We failed a levy in 2019, it passed in March of 2020.
This is a new money, correct?
They were both new money
Okay,
issues,
thanks.
yes. This resulted in a layoff in June of 2020. It was one administrator and 24 teachers. The failure also caused the following to be cut. Busing to state minimums, eliminate the following field trips and band trips: Soy High School, Crossroads, middle school SROs, middle school and freshman athletics, all non-sport supplementals. Travel and PD was reduced by 90%, instructional classroom and dues and fees reduced by 10%, and sold Browning, Washington, Taft, and McKinley. So I just wanted to show that the history that we've been fighting through in what appears to be like an every 10-year cycle. And while everyone was very excited about May of 2023, it was just a renewal. So I think it's important to know that that levy was just a renewal. We, gave us some runway to not think about the levy cycle. However, it was not a new money issue.
Do you guys understand that? Because when I first learned about the levies, I was confused about, because it seemed like we were always going for like additional funds, and the concept that we were just extending because we had these funds and they were only for 5 years, and then they would stop if we didn't go back on the ballot. And that was really confusing to me, at least when I first was learning about all this. So I just wanted to make sure.
Our permanent improvement funds, we've talked about this a couple times. I wanted to dive into it a little bit more. This would be something, this is used for improvements to your facilities such as roofs, parking lots, air conditioning, renovations, safety and security, technology, buses, and other vehicles. It's currently funded with the 1.3 mil permanent improvement levy, which generates about $2 million per year. Excluding debt payments from the 2016 bond issue, we have annual debt payments in the amount of $4.1 million per year. So I mentioned in 2011, 2012 that our buildings were falling apart. The solution was to take out a lot of debt back then and basically fix all the buildings.
And that was through a bond?
Those were just unvoted issues called COPS. So we're paying for it with permanent improvement funds. But they were not bond issues. The bond issue was for 2 new high schools in Longfellow, but.
Oh, okay, sorry, I was confused. You're talking about repairs to the remaining
Yeah,
buildings.
remaining buildings, acquire NCI Willoughby, fix up the building for NCI Eastlake, just all the other buildings to get them in good shape, took out a lot of debt because we didn't have the cash to physically do it.
Okay, so, sorry, this is probably a silly question, but I don't know what a COPS is.
Certificate of participation, it's just the type of,
I still don't know what it is, sorry.
Neither do I, I'm fascinated now.
it's just the type of debt, so.
Participation award for debt.
Yeah, we actually, when I first started, I knew about the levies, but I didn't realize about the debt schedule. And the attorney said, yeah, you guys are like, have the most debt in the state. You have like one of everything. We had like qualified school construction bonds, we had TANs, we had COPS, we had GEO bonds, we have everything. And I'm just like, this is not a participation award you want. But
So
we
you're
have it.
saying that because of all of these debts that we've accrued, that we need money to keep paying like the minimum balance? Like if I had a credit card, like I racked it up, and now I need enough to pay the minimum balance, and I had like a piggy bank, and now my piggy bank is like running out?
So with the debt, they give you like a debt schedule. So you have to pay a certain amount of principal and interest every single year.
Yeah.
And that for us is $4.1 million a year. And
So how much do we have in the piggy bank where we pay it out of?
well,
Uh-oh.
it's primarily, so all of our $2 million from PI goes towards that, but then the other $2 million has to come from the general fund.
Is
And-
How
that like
close
a,
are-
oh, sorry, go ahead.
How close are we to having that paid off?
Well, there's about
Or
7 different pieces of debt. And they have them laddered, or we have them laddered, not they. Back in the day, the attorneys structured it so that when one would fall off, one would ratchet up. So they're laddered. So the annual debt payment in total is
so it
pretty
stays the
consistent.
same
Mhm.
throughout the entirety of
For
the
the
debt.
most part.
So basically, every time, because we don't have like a PI fund balance, because,
Mhm.
and I don't know why that is, I'm guessing because we just don't have enough money to have that, right? That we're consistently going to the general fund to pay off debts, which is not necessarily putting money away for all the repairs that we have on the buildings that we
Right.
need now.
Mhm.
I guess I kind of had this false impression that we were like putting money away for the like buildings now with the PI stuff, and I didn't really understand this whole debt thing. So thank you for explaining to me.
So you may or may not have this, so I'm putting you on the spot. What is the oldest debt? What's the year of origination when we pulled the loan and/or took the debt agreement?
Most of them were during that time of 2011, 2012.
Now, how long until they're completely matured?
What was their term?
Well,
Well, if
they,
they're
they keep
laddered,
they keep varying, and then every time we had historically low interest rates, the prior treasurer would refund them. So they would be refunded at a lower interest rate and spread out. So they've been refunded a few times. Right now we're just
You didn't do that, correct?
no. Well, interest rates are going up, so
Right.
also you can't recognize any savings right now.
But you did do something that helped us with interest rates. It wasn't this problem of extending our debt, but it was something else where you actually saved us money with interest rates, right?
Right.
It was for the bond, wasn't it?
Hmm?
Wasn't it something for the bond?
We're all finance gurus up here,
Um,
Nick. Mr. Chernow, sorry.
There was one instance where the escrow account wasn't being invested for a period of 2 weeks, and by restructuring something, we generated like $40,000 or $50,000 by being able to invest the escrow funds. Another one was Capital One reached out, and we were able to negotiate just reducing the interest rate from like 4% to 2% without refunding or restretching anything. But there hasn't been really any opportunities. There was one right when I started that was already in the works for refunding. So because it was already in motion, saw that one through, but that was also during that period of really low interest rates, where I think we were at like a 6 or 7% interest rate, and we brought it down to like something in the threes. Because that was, I started in 2020, which is with historically low rates, but everything has to be callable, so it has to come back up to be callable, and since then, nothing's really made sense. You have to do a whole analysis to make sure it makes sense, and we haven't called anything. We haven't refunded anything. We've just been making our payments, but to Mrs. Schatzman's point, the PI fund, the PI levy just generates $2 million a year. That's it, $2 million. And we have a $4 million debt payment obligation, which we can't satisfy, so the general fund pays for all of that. So then any of the improvements, such as facilities, roofs, parking lots, renovations, any of the technology, vehicle, safety and security, all that comes out of the general fund, because there's no PI fund to pull from. And that's why I said the estimated shortfall of the PI fund is probably somewhere close to $4 million per year, which would be $2 million more for debt, and the $2 million a year just for basic upkeep of all of our facilities, parking lots, and things like that, which would mean about a $2 million increase.
Aren't
So,
there like some boards that have policies or something that say if your PI fund falls below this, or basically it directs you on when you need to ask the taxpayers for more money or kind of reevaluate your priorities? Is there that for PI, or is it more just for like your general fund?
I'm not familiar with like a cash balance policy for like a PI fund, but I'm sure that's something that could be created. But I've
It's
never
just because like I'm listening to this and it sounds like we inherited a big problem from the past of people who were making decisions, and we don't really have like a rubric of like why they did what they did. So in thinking about how our board is trying to like be really proactive and to set guardrails in place, it seems like being thoughtful now where we're not in this crunch on the ballot, like right now, about how are we doing this and how do we decide what we're doing? What are the levers that happen so that we have time to think it through instead of being reactive? Like that all seems like in line with what we're doing as a board. So I don't know if it goes through like finance committee or if it's like we just set our own policy or whatever. I would just like to think about that stuff.
Where's the light at the end of the tunnel? How far away is completely paying off those debts that we inherited?
I think they're on the books until at least like 2030.
I was gonna say 30 years would take us out to 42, and if we were constantly refunding, it would extend.
Yeah.
I think some of them are like 20 years issuances, 25. So we're definitely looking
For a while,
probably another 10 years.
until our kids graduate.
Yeah.
Even
Oh,
our young
Pat's
ones.
youngest kid graduates.
Well, I think I mean, absolutely, that's a long time, but I think more importantly is how many more years can our buildings sustain not receiving the improvements they need from this fund? And is waiting 10 years feasible? And I think that's where we need to maybe start initiating a study to understand, can we afford to upkeep or to bring our buildings to current state to support the technology and/or just functional needs? Oh, it's rotating away, Nick.
I'm only going to chime in once, I promise. But, one of the ideas behind the strategic plan and the committees we're going to stand up in the fall is that these are the important conversations that will have to occur there once they occur here. And so I think we've had the structure to begin engaging in those long-term plans to make sure that we, again, figure out what our path forward is. But to have these conversations now, I think I agree 100%. We are in this unique window where we get to be proactive. And lean into the article and the history and try and be a board and a period of time where we can make some good, healthy decisions.
I think, go ahead, Denise. No, go ahead.
Do we have any historical data that somebody could point to in black and white, like how the heck that happened with our school district to get us, that we're stuck with here with that debt kind of thing? Is there any kind of,
Prevent it from happening again.
so that if there is some kind of pattern that we can see, so we can make sure that is not this is what we need to avoid, or these
Like
are the.
maybe even almost like I'm thinking, like I'm visualizing while you're saying, almost like a timeline where it's like overlaid with this year, this happened, this year, this happened. We could put like these pinpoints in, and I think it would show us what you're saying, that like pattern of how we get into these things. And then, like I'm saying, it seems like we make rash decisions in the moment without thinking through our long-term priorities. So how can this board try to help dig us out of where we?
Debt free and then just kind of.
What
Move
kind of
forward.
happened was, historical context. When you have everything in the general fund bucket, everything is competing against itself. So then you have to prioritize kids learning or putting a roof on a building. So what's taking priority? Probably kids learning. So you're having leaks in buildings, and buildings are falling apart because deferred maintenance. If you let that roof go on your house, how much more damage is that roof in that building going to get? I think there were videos and pictures of them covering up computer labs with tarps because when it rained, it was raining in the computer lab.
Or
And
in the winter, you didn't have any heat in the
Well,
study hall.
all kinds of things.
It was
So
great.
then the next superintendent came in and said, this is unacceptable. This is not a conducive learning environment. And the only path forward was to take out all of this debt to fix all the buildings.
Okay.
So anytime you're, robbing Peter to pay Paul, eventually you gotta pay the piper.
gonna catch
So
up.
You gotta.
So am I hearing you say the best way we can prevent repeating history is to be proactive about the maintenance and facilities work we need to do in our buildings before we have holes everywhere?
catastrophic losses.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Proactive and intentional.
Yeah, if you.
Right, yeah.
Like when the roof is due, you
It needs
gotta
to be done.
you gotta do the roof. You can't just say, it's $600,000. We really don't wanna spend $600,000 on the roof. Because if the roof goes, then there's a lot more damage once the roof goes.
Well, I was just gonna say, I love the idea of the timeline, and I think ultimately our conversations here are to provide transparent access to the historical context that gives the community and parents a reason why we're where we're at. And a lot of people don't have that. Maybe they haven't lived here long enough, or it wasn't on their radar because they didn't have kids and they weren't voting on levies at that time. So I really think we need to start having conversations with our community now so we can build awareness. So when we need to start making decisions and asking for their support in whatever that is, they need to know that we've been trying for a while to make them aware. And when we went to Capitol Conference, a district, I gave it to Mrs. Keverin. They have in their updates they send to the community, they have the age of the building. the last time repairs were done, potential future maintenance needs, you know, what is new and up and coming and what's amazing, like how are we, so they're spotlighting their buildings and their communication to the community to say, hey, we've been talking about our buildings for years. I was talking to a community member and they were making mention of Royal View. Well, people don't know that there's been additions and the building has been like, it's Frankenstein together. And when people walk in, like parents, when you walk through some of our schools, the floors are 16 different types of tile and the ceilings don't match. And they don't understand that there's reasons why that's occurring, because to mediate asbestos or potential asbestos, you can't do that. So what do? You swap and switch. We don't have a context in our community to help them understand why this debt existed, how it benefited the students of the past, how it is sustaining the students of today, and how we're moving forward. So I think we need to, that timeline would be really helpful, maybe a little bit more detailed for us on the board, or it's actually going into the finances. But I think there might be a real great way to say, we do have debt, and it was tied to these events, and move on. So,
Well, that was one slide. How many do you have?
All
Yeah.
right.
Whew.
We're invested, that's all I mean.
American Rescue Plan, mentioned that a few times. These will expire tomorrow. We were awarded a total of $7.8 million. This covered everything from learning loss to technology for social distance learning to health and hygiene to instructional programs. So
That was total 7.8 over multiple years, or?
yes, for the whole 3-year period.
Thank
They're
you.
Going back to March of 2020.
So that's why you're saying down there 2.5 million, because you're dividing about what we were getting per year.
So we had $2.5 million left this year that we spent. But those funds will be going back to the general fund next year.
Because there are things that we can't go without.
Right. So we did a great job of supplanting, which is what my fifth bullet point is. We supplanted most of these, which freed up general fund dollars versus adding new initiatives. So we did add some things but some districts hired 10 new people. And now that the funds are expired, do they continue to pay for 10 new people, or do they have to let them go? Versus we were never in a strong financial position to just add. So we felt like we needed to, pull back some of those dollars back into our general fund to try to prolong the next levy cycle.
So we basically, instead of saying thank you for this money that we got from the federal government, we can now do a bunch of new things. We're like, thank you for this money, we can stay off the ballot by using this to pay for things that we already need to pay for? Is that a fair?
More or less.
Okay, thank you. That sounds,
Okay.
that sounds reasonable. That sounds like a smart approach.
Which is why they're all coming back to the general fund next year, because they were things we were already needing to pay for. Just a quick makeup of what our revenues, how we're funded. You can see about 76% of our funding is from local sources, 24% from state sources. So from the state, you're looking at the state foundation and homestead and rollback.
So that's like what the state gives us per pupil
Well, the
is
home-
in the state number.
From the state foundation, yes. The homestead and rollback is that 12.5% from the levies prior to 2012.
And what the state gives us per person is equivalent to what, like 2,500-ish per student?
Something around there. It's not much. And then but you could see the biggest portion is our property taxes from the levies. And then public the green line, that one's also, that's from like your utility companies and things like that.
Are you doing a slide on like the average cost of educating a student? Do you have one? I think the last time we had a levy on the ballot, we were looking at this and it was like maybe 13,000 something. Does that sound about right? 13, 14,000. And the state gives I'm just trying to break it down into like a number I can understand. So it's like 13,000-ish. to educate a student on average. Obviously, some students, depending on their needs, might cost more and other ones cost less. And then the state is giving us, let's say, 2,500, maybe even 3,000, right? So then we're making up that difference of that 10,000 or whatever it is. And our only resource for that is local property taxes.
It's more like 2,300.
Okay, so basically, we're talking about the gap in that is, this is how much it costs to educate a student based on our priorities and what we've done and the rising costs of salaries and electric bills and all those things, right? It comes out to this. So we have to figure out where that money's coming from and what the state has decided we should do, because this is their formula that they've created, is to go to our local property tax owners and get the money from them. Like, that's what's supposed to happen by law right now.
With the Fair School Funding Plan, yes, they look at the community's ability to pay, and they decide who gets more and who gets less. Like the school district of East Cleveland, they get like $11,000 or $12,000 a student because they do not believe that those taxpayers have an ability to pay property taxes. A school district like Orange might get $500 or $1,000 a kid or student because they believe that Orange can pay more. So by being closer to Orange than East Cleveland, they believe Willoughby Eastlake taxpayers have a strong ability to pay and should pass levies to support their school system.
And so that's different though from like a city or a county who might get their portfolio of where they draw money from. They might draw some from property taxes, but they draw a majority from, like at the county level, sales taxes, at the city level, income taxes, right? That's not our makeup as schools. We're getting like state money, a small amount of federal money, and then our main primary by design of the legislature is to go to our local taxpayers and get it from property taxes, right?
Yes.
So I think that's confusing because all of these taxes, when you're talking about public goods, work together, right? Like if we're gonna pay for things as citizens, they come from sales tax, income tax, or property tax. And a lot of the time, because when you're paying sales or income tax, usually it's either because you're earning money and it's being taken out and it's not as visible, right?
many taxes.
Or you're like buying something, right? And you're at the register maybe, or you're online. But your property taxes are like, you already have your house, right? And now you're getting a bill and you're like, what the what? And it's always the focus on schools because schools are by design getting most of their funding from property tax. So it's this hard situation where I think you really need a lot of education, back to Krista's point, because it's so hard to understand why it was designed this way in the first place. And that we're doing what the design permits us to do, and none of us like
And
that,
what really
right?
sucks, and how interest rates were so low, houses were selling so much higher, which made our area kind of
Look really
look
wealthy,
really
yes.
wealthy. I mean,
Yes.
we do have our very wealthy community, members of our community, and we have the drastic opposite side of that as well. So it's very, that's why we look kind of like Orange right now, opposed to East Cleveland. You know, we kind of, in retrospect, we have both sides of that spectrum in our community. So it is, with how the housing market inflated over the past few years, it kind of messed Lake County up big time. Personal opinion there.
All right, I
We're
guess
all
I'm-
feeling it there.
Oh,
And
yeah.
it's not what the
We're
what.
all feeling it.
Let's be honest, we're not saying what the what.
Oh, yeah.
All right, this is PG. PG show.
Yes.
Age appropriate content always.
What?
I just
Dang it.
wanted to show kind of the makeup on where our revenues come from. This is a comparison between last year's revenues and this year. So we did receive less in property taxes this year. That is due to a $3 million payment we received last year because we won the East Lake Power Plant settlement. We're like,
I have another thought. Sorry. It's results back. Excuse me. Back to the last slide.
Mhm.
Is there any? Thank you. Is there any way, if we do have, say, an influx of money, is there any way that we can help the community out? Is that a possibility?
So one thing I would jump in and say is, because I know it's like, we would, I guess if I were to want to help our community, I would want there to be targeted relief to the people who need it, because of
Right.
your point, right? That there's like this big discrepancy. And my understanding of the legalities of what a school, for instance, could do would be to say, we're not gonna collect on one of our levies. That would be like the legal thing we could do, but that would not be targeted. In fact, it'd be the opposite. It'd be disproportionately helping the people who live in the most expensive houses and probably wouldn't really provide the proper relief, which is where like, I think we should get really involved in advocating at the State House, because there's particular bills right now, one that's a really good one, in my opinion, a circuit breaker, which actually does provide that targeted relief to people who fall below a certain income threshold as it relates to their value of their property taxes, and to people over 65. Because at the state level, they can make laws to actually target it to the people who need it, instead of like what always happens is like the people at the top get the help and the people at the bottom get worse off. And so that's where I feel like schools' hands are kind of tied.
Well, going back to your point, Ryan, I actually have a couple slides talking about that.
My
So
man.
we're going to get there. We're going to get there. Might have to take a 5-minute
It's important
recess.
stuff, Dr. Moore.
The tangible personal tax, that is the tax on your electric and gas utility companies. We've already talked about our state aid. So you have the unrestricted, and then you have restricted. The restricted ones are more for, they're spelled out like one's for gifted, one's for career tech, things like that. So they say these are the buckets those restricted funds need to go in. The unrestricted, they're like, here's for your general operations. You could see the homestead and rollback, $8 million per year. That's a pretty sizable number. That's that 12.5% on those levies prior to 2012. And then your all other revenues, that could be everything from Excel Tech tuition we get from other schools, rental income donations, sale of property, insurance proceeds, interest on your investments. Interest rates are going up or they're high. That's good for earning money on your money. However, it's not great for refunding debt, which we're not doing right now. So
Right. So like elephant in the room, because we're talking about at all these board meetings how we're like reshuffling costs, we're doing things to in fact be smarter about our money, and then we look at this and we're like, oh look, it went up by $1 million. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because I felt like we were doing so good at being mindful and never adding costs when we were adding all these programs for students, and then to see this, it kind of feels like, whoa.
these are revenues, not expenses.
Revenues.
Oh, sorry.
So
Okay.
we have more.
We
Oh my gosh, sorry.
generated-
I thought you were doing the expenses.
we generated
This help-
about
this is why I drink a
$1.2 million
I was like,
more.
Jamie, that's a good thing.
Right.
So
It's
this is
like-
revenues. We'll get to expenses in a second.
Oh, good.
So here's your expenditures. You can see about 73% is made up of people. It's actually more because within the 19% for purchase services is our contract with Peterman, which is our bus drivers. So probably closer to 80% of our budget is people. And then the remainder would be your electric bill, your insurance on your buildings, your
Cost of operation.
just cost of operation, your supplies for students, your upkeep. So anytime times get tough, that's why it's always looking at people. So I just wanted to, once again, highlight really where our dollars go. Here's the slide that you were talking about, Jamie, and it went up $9 million. So the reason for that is for the first line, we had a 1.99% negotiated raise from our contract, and then in addition to that, employees typically get steps, which means, their salary increases on the salary schedule. The retirement and insurance benefits increased because we had a 38% increase in healthcare.
Wow.
And then you see purchase services going up and supplies going up. That is a result of ESSER funds coming back onto the books because we had some things And
So
all-
those are the ones, those are the things we were paying for with the ESSER funds
Mhm.
before and now have to be paid for by the general fund.
So we did see an increase in transportation because that contract goes up every year. And then also our utility bills increased pretty sizably. I think everyone's utility bills went up. I think it was close to like 10%. So
And you had said you locked us into like the best rates we could be at, but like
It
despite
still went
that,
up.
it still
Yeah.
went way up.
So we're just like anybody else. We're gotta keep the lights on. So between ESSER funds going away and rising costs, plus those two other items I mentioned, that is how you get to almost a $10 million increase in 1 year.
Now, do we project this every year going up 9%?
No. A lot of that, like I said, we don't expect insurance costs to go up 38% every year. And then ESSER funds, you might see another sizable jump next year because of the ESSER funds, but then year over year, it shouldn't be.
It
like
should
that.
taper off, right? Because
Yes,
then they won't be
I was gonna
increasing.
say that 8% difference, that's not sustainable.
No.
No.
Well, that's why
like, oh
insurance
my goodness.
was such a big
A big
thing
to
that we had
yeah.
that we addressed through negotiations.
Hey, good news though, went down $40 for interest and fiscal
I did
charges.
see that.
That's right.
Congratulations on that, that's
The
great.
interest was not-
There you go. Went down 40,000.
That's what we talked about earlier, right? Yeah.
There you go.
That's you.
There's some of the debt that we were talking about. Here we go. This is where we're gonna get into some. This is a big document.
Let's do it.
It's glorious.
I feel like it's important for us to do this very comprehensive review because there is so much information out there about what is going on and understanding what is truly happening is
Now, why do we have Lawrence County instead of Lake?
No, because he
Good
didn't
sir.
he didn't present at
Well,
the
very
OASBO
well.
annual conference, and I wanted it to come from the horse's mouth, which is a chief deputy auditor of a county, because I felt like they would give the best information.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk about kind of how they view this is their world, the county auditor's office, and I'll ask Auditor Galloway to put something like this together for you guys. I'm sure he'll be very happy.
Oh,
We
yeah.
should all email
Yeah.
and ask.
Yeah, that's
well,
right.
he can come
Considering-
present if he wanted
It's
to.
64 pages long. I'm sure he'd be thrilled.
He can come talk to us if he wants.
I'm sure he wouldn't put it together, somebody in the office would.
Now, I won't do all 64 pages. I've kind of highlighted a couple I want to talk
30.
about, but we can if you want to.
Oh, wait, let me go get my blankie and pillow.
There we go.
This
So-
is exciting stuff.
Oh,
So,
I'm so excited.
you know, the mass reappraisals, you talk about sexennial versus the triennial update. So mass appraisal, every 6 years, they do a reappraisal, but every 3 years in the middle, they do the triennial update. And this is to accurately reflect property values in the current real estate marketplace, which is what we are all aware of. And then the Ohio Department of Tax makes the final determination as to what the updated property values should be as determined by the auditor. So the Ohio Department of Tax is the final say. And all county auditors are required by law to do this.
So I heard this morning at the, or like when I watched the commissioners meeting, that the step they're on is that Auditor Galloway submitted, and we were, apparently Lake County was the first county to submit to it's the tax commission, right? Am I saying that right? And then he got a preliminary approval back so that they're coming out at the end of July, the notifications of what the values
And then-
were tentatively.
Customers. Homeowners can then challenge,
Correct. Yeah.
which is nice. It gives them time to challenge the revaluation, which is.
Yeah, and it sounds like they're gonna have like open office hours, or you
Yeah.
can like send in stuff or
'Cause
whatever.
they even know it's kind of a lot. It's a lot.
More details about mass appraisals. All properties are reviewed in a combination of, you know, aerial, street view, photographs, neighborhood delineation, sales verification analysis. And then here we are, there's that step. Property owners will be notified of their tentative values and have full access to informal hearings to discuss the new valuation. And it takes 2.5 years to complete the process, so that's why 6 months before that's why we're hitting July. So that we're right on time. This is the step where we are currently in Lake County. Then, how does the master reappraisal work? I didn't plan on talking about these slides, but we're gonna just talk about them. We're just gonna get through them. Neighborhood data, recent home sales, visual exterior inspection, physical characteristics. These are some of the things they look for during their master reappraisal. Like I said, this is why I didn't come up with my own presentation, because I wouldn't know exactly how county auditors conduct their own master reappraisal.
But like what you're saying is schools have nothing to do with how the homes are valued.
Correct.
Now, wait, hold on, sorry.
Sure.
I know certain cities, once a house does sell, like say there's a house in, we'll say Willowick, that it hasn't been sold ever, and it sells for $500,000, and it's only at the auditor's office appraised for $95,000. Do we, in our cities, I know it's case by case, but I know and ours is very unique with us having it every city in Lake County almost. Are our cities, do they have the ability, or do they go back for an appraisal once that is sold? If they see that. Can they? Probably yes. Do they? I don't know. And do you know? And if not, could you find that? There's a lot of questions I got there.
The home values all comes down to the county level, the county auditor's office. The city doesn't really have anything that they do from that standpoint.
The subdivisions could challenge the value at the Board of Revisions, but we would never do that as the school.
Well, the only one that can bring forth a challenge would be the school district.
And we don't do
we
it.
don't challenge residential property unless it's like an investment property, like a large apartment building. But even that was, that ability to challenge was reduced with the passage, I think it might have been House Bill 216 or something. I can't think of the bill offhand, it might be 216. It has to be more than $500,000 difference. And maybe even some other metrics to even bring forth a challenge. We could file counter complaints if we thought it was warranted. Maybe someone bought a business for $5 million and they want to bring it down to $1 million. Or we're like, well, that doesn't make any sense. You bought it for $5 million. It was an arm's length sale, so it should be worth $5 million. Those are kind of the instances that we pursue.
But we're not getting into it with like your typical residential property owner.
We don't file against taxpayers, residential homeowners. That was their timeline. So this is the difference between a reappraisal and a triennial update. Reappraisals every 6 years. The updates are in the middle of the 3-year midpoint. Sexennial reappraisal establishes the fair market value versus the triennial update just updates the values based on the neighborhood market trends. For the reappraisal, each property individually is reviewed. Exterior inspections only, neighborhood delineation, so it's like a complete refresh on the reappraisal. The update's just trying to gently bring everybody up together, and then instead of being a large 6-year cycle, because I feel like even 3 years is kind of like a shock to people. Can you imagine if it was a 6-year cycle? It would be large swings every 6 years. So that's kind of why they probably have it in that. So, okay, let's talk about why values change, I guess. Physical characteristics of the property have not changed. Reappraisal occurs every year, almost. And so new construction, demolition exemptions, these are when non-reappraisal changes. So this is kind of just why values change. And this all has to do with the county auditor's office. So what I really wanted to talk about for the first slide, which took us a while to get here, was the inside millage.
It's good for you because you live in our city and pay taxes to our district.
So So here's for tax rates, we have a constitutional restriction. All real property must be taxed uniformly according to their fair market value, and all real property must be treated equally, and taxpayers must be taxed the same amount for the same service. And so that's, the Constitution imposes that.
And the bottom of that was referring to inside mills, right? That's the last sentence.
Correct.
The
So,
taxes cannot exceed 1% of true value except by popular vote. That's the difference between like the inside and the
voted
outside
and,
mills.
yeah. So, but we're gonna get there.
Oh,
So that's
I'm
when
just so fascinated. I read this in my
she's just
free
like,
time.
boom, she's ready to go.
We
Um,
appreciate you for it.
So there are three different tax rates. You have the voted rate at which the levy was passed. So these are more for like current operating levies, not emergency levies. The effective rate, so our effective rate is our voted rate for emergency levies. And then, so class 1 would be residential, class 2 would be business. So that's why you have different rates for class 1 versus class 2. So you're unvoted, this is your inside mills, is approved by the county budget commission but cannot exceed 10 total mills for any taxpayer. So it's usually split up between the school district, the city, the county. They might even give some to like the public library. Of the 10 mills, Willoughby Eastlake is given 4.8. So there are 5.2 mills out there somewhere else. However, I do know, because Dan Troy likes to bring it up, that Lake County only enforces 4 inside mills. And they're one of the very few counties that only enforce 4 or less than 10 inside
I
mills.
have no idea what you just said. Can you say it like a little bit simpler?
Break it down barn style.
You cannot go past above 10 mills total between all the entities. So any
And 10 mil is like 1 cent per like value, like 1 cent or like 1% of the value of the total assessed property or something? Can you start at the basic?
Oh my goodness. Now let's see if there's a basic on here.
Like
You can just-
sixth grade level, please.
Ad lib.
Well,
Where's Chat GPT when you need it?
1 mil is a 1/10 of 1%. So all 10 mills would be 1%.
Of what?
Your property valuation, your taxable valuation
Of my house.
of your house.
So like the number I'm gonna get in the mail, or is it 35% of
It's
that
the
number?
taxable, which is the 35%.
Well, this is so simple.
Oh,
America.
that's why people love taxes.
Okay, but then since you're saying it's the 1% or
Well, if
0.1% or whatever,
it's
sorry, I'm like.
10 mils is 1%. 1 mil is 1/10%.
Okay, but so since it's 1% of 10 mils, but that's not what we get.
We get
We get
4.8.
4.8.
So we get about 0.5%, 0.48% on inside mills.
Just guaranteed.
Yes,
Okay.
That's what the district gets, correct?
that's what the district gets.
And the remaining funds are used for other things determined at a county level,
Throughout the county.
The county
the city.
figures out how they want to distribute
to include our libraries, our parks, and other things that rely
the
on.
city,
And the city determines their
the
own
county.
formula, or not
Mhm.
formula, but number.
Well,
It's
the-
fun.
Well, then, so that's the unvoted millage. And then
Where's the
which is
popcorn?
Inside. Then your voted millage is your outside, and that is passed by popular vote, and that is like your emergency levies. So here's your inside mills. Limited to 1% of taxable values. That's that 35%, the taxable value, and not your appraised value or your value on the website. And then the county budget commission allocates the inside mills to eligible political subdivisions. You have your county, your school, your townships, municipalities.
And we have no control over what we get,
No, it's all set at the county budget commission level.
which is made up of the auditor, the treasurer, and
Auditor,
the
treasurer, and the prosecutor.
Okay.
Yes. And so that's basically what, whenever we talk about inside millage, this is what the inside millage is. And because it's locked in and fixed at that certain rate, it's not subject to the reduction factors like House Bill 920 or anything like that, and it's just frozen at that fixed number. So it's always 4.8. So if values go up, it's still 4.8, which means it would generate more because 1% or 0.48% of a bigger number is a bigger number versus reducing down.
This is for all districts. Obviously, our specific number is different, but for any district, anytime when you're talking about their inside millage, whatever portion they get, when property values increase, they're getting more money.
This is for any entity that has inside millage, not just,
Like the cities, the counties,
Yes.
yes, okay.
so any
There's
school.
some throughout the county that don't have, they're not at that floor, of that 10 mil floor like we are, correct?
Well, that's the
well-
20 mil floor, which is separate from this,
Yeah.
right?
Inside millage is complete, its own, it's like locked in no matter what for every entity.
It's part
So
of what the government says they have to do with money.
And it's in the this is in the Constitution.
this is in the Constitution. So that 10 mil limitation, those 10 mils are frozen, so they are not subject to the reduction factors. So any entity that has an inside mill would see an increase in funding because as valuations go up, the mill stays the same.
Now, what determines inside and outside?
Voted and unvoted.
Yeah, so the 10 is what's given
You did just say that, didn't
to those entities by the commission, and the
But it's
voted.
you?
confusing.
There's a lot of stuff
It's
coming
so
to mind. There's a
confusing.
lot. I
Yeah,
see.
the voted would be up to that entity to put on the ballot to be passed.
Kind of like we see in the townships more often. Like if they're wanting to get rid of, or get their fire department, or get rid of their fire.
Yeah, like a
department.
safety levy or
Yeah.
something like that.
Mhm.
And for schools, it would either be an emergency levy or an operating levy,
Or
which are
Permanent
either,
improvement levy.
which the levies can either be levied as a percentage or a fixed total dollar amount, which I'm sure you're gonna get to, so I'll shut up.
Oh,
Does
there,
anybody have snacks?
No,
just-
but I
I have
really am
some-
regretting that
I
decision.
didn't eat
Well.
dinner before we got.
someone can DoorDash.
Steak all around.
So, let's just talk about that. So here's your outside, your voted millage. All levies in excess of the 10 mil limitation, which is your inside mills, are considered outside levies and only can be enacted by popular vote. There are multiple purposes for the levies, both inside and outside. You see your current expense, which is general operations of the district, emergency, which is also general operations of a school district. So we could implement a current expense levy or an emergency levy. However, historically, we have gone the emergency route.
And the current expense one is a percentage,
It's a
right?
mill-
And the
It's mill-based,
mill base, yes, which is, I guess, okay, yes.
yes, but yeah, I guess you could say it's a.
Yes, but there's a
2%.
caveat, I know, so.
Special purpose, so you have your permanent improvement levy, like you said, you can have your fire levy, your park levy, things like that, and then bonds, which is for new buildings or construction. All right, Denise, stay with me. I told you this is
I
gonna
know,
be
my
riveting.
eyes are glazing over, sorry.
I told you, this is, only John would be excited, and he is, look at him.
Why
I
do
love it
you,
too,
why do you keep
genuinely.
discounting my enthusiasm
I'm
for
not.
school finance,
And then
Mr. Chernow?
Here's the last bullet point, inside millage is not subject to the tax reduction factors. So that's what I'm saying, it's locked in, House Bill 920, any other
Are you gonna
reduction
tell us
factor.
about the tax reduction factor?
All right, can I
Oh,
ask a question really
there's,
fast?
there's lots of stuff. We're only on slide 21 of 64.
Mr. Turner,
So-
we had a conversation about this presentation.
No, so I just have a question.
I know.
So you said it was 4.8 is our inside millage,
Yes,
and there's a 20 mil floor.
yes,
So when we take 20 minus 4.8,
15.2.
15.2 is the number of mills that our levies are currently generating, or would generate if we were hitting the 20 mil floor, right? So the 15.2, you take pieces of that number 15 and break it into little parts, and that's how much each levy was worth, right?
Emergency levies
Yeah.
aren't factored into that calculation.
All right. So ours is even more complex because we have emergency levies.
Yes,
All right. So I-
because emergency levies are dollar-based, not mill-based, so they are excluded from the calculation.
So, and I think we're gonna get to that 20 mil floor
Mhm.
number in a second. So I think if you picture the pie graph that you had up earlier with how we get our funding, right? There's that really big green part, and then there was the other little parts. Well, the other little parts, a lot of those little parts are, and please tell me if I'm wrong, this time I'm putting pieces together. Those little parts are the inside mills. They're the things that the government collects for normal operating, and then they piecemeal it up and hand it out, right? That 4.8 is what they give us. It's
No, it's in the property
It's
tax.
in
budget.
No, I know,
Property
it's in the, but I'm saying like the visual graphic, it's what we're guaranteed to get, the 4.8.
If you, if you want to visually think of it.
Yeah,
that way.
think of it like a circle, it's still the smallest portion of it. The biggest portion of what we're collecting are those outside mills.
Right.
Which were voted on, where taxpayers came together and said, hey, we know you need more money to do what we want you to do, so we're gonna allow you to take that money from us based on the value of our home. Right?
Right.
Okay, so the larger portion of our funding is coming from voters. And then the smaller portion of our funding is coming from a formula that's predetermined at a county level where they're trying to give it to those subdivisions, like the county, the schools, and the cities.
And the 10 mills was established in the Constitution.
Okay.
So that was baked in the Constitution, the 10 mil limitation.
And this is why it's so confusing to us, is because we aren't having those conversations, we're not actuaries, we're not in those. So all I think what I, as a school board member, is our mills are mostly comprised of voted on funds from people who went to the ballot and said, our schools need this money, we're gonna give it to them. And then the smallest portion is being given to us from the county. And that's really it. And then what happens, something triggers and changes when we hit the 20 mil floor. So when we hit 20, when that 4.8 plus what we asked for adds up to 20, something happens.
Yeah, we'll get
Okay.
there.
Well, yeah, you have to probably start with House Bill 920,
No,
right?
it's
Yeah.
all coming in.
Yeah.
And now, no, as the county say, as we all discussed earlier, over the past few years, everything's kind of inflated.
Mhm.
It just keeps inflating and inflating and inflating. When does that balloon pop? Or, like,
Will it ever pop?
will it?
Probably not.
That's scary. That's scary.
Basic economics,
Yeah.
supply and demand, and people at
It's
2
nuts.
and 3% interest rates aren't selling.
Well, segue, the world is inflating, but
Right.
our levies are not inflating because of House Bill 920 and the tax reduction factor.
All right,
Let's do this.
we got all kinds of things to talk about. We're only a third of the way through this mini presentation.
I want to talk to you tomorrow.
Voted levies are, divvied up into two groups. So the first one is your fixed rate levies, which is your current expense and your special purpose. So the only current or the only fixed rate levy we have is our PI levy, which is subject to the tax reduction factors. However, because PI goes to the permanent improvement fund, it is not included in any 20 mil floor calculation because it's not general fund dollars. Then the other one is fixed sum levies, which is designed to raise a specific dollar amount, which is your emergency levy, and only school districts can do this, and your bond debt. So because the bond needs to generate a certain amount of money to build a building, or when you pass an emergency levy, you're like, we need to pass $8 million. So forever, that is only ever going to generate $8 million. So if, it doesn't matter if your house is worth $100,000 when it was first passed, or $400,000 in 10 years, it's still only going to collect $8 million. So it's frozen. Emergency levies are frozen at that dollar amount.
Which is why the tax reduction factor doesn't apply, because it only ever collects that amount. The tax reduction factor is designed so that if someone's value of their home goes up, now if you're taking a percentage of that, that's gonna go up, but it actually can't because of the reduction factor, right?
So emergency levies are just locked in.
Right.
But on current operating, it would be reduced down. So the mills would be, you'd have your voted mills, and then the effective millage would drop to make sure the number was the same, so they're almost acting like an emergency levy.
Until you get to the 20
Until you
mil
get to the floor.
floor.
So outside fixed rates, most common type of levy, values change due to reappraisals, revenue does not change, the rate is adjusted, which we said was the effective rate. We do not have any of these, except for the PI one. Fixed sum, these are our emergency levies, they're voted, intended to generate a specific amount of money over a specific number of years, which is why they're not continuous also, and we're always renewing them because they're just for a specific number of years.
So that's the chart you showed us in the very beginning.
Yes.
You were showing us all of these type of levies
Yes.
and when they're all due to be voted on again, or else we lose the money and we lose the credit from the state,
Yes.
from the homestead.
Correct.
Okay.
So these are your bond and emergency levies. Typically, your bond is not renewed. It is, for a finite purpose to build a building. The rate is set by the Budget Commission each year, so they make sure that the revenues make sense, and the revenues do not change. The rate is adjusted to produce that specific amount of money. So like I said, pass for $8 million, they will adjust the rate to make sure it's only making $8 million. So this is where emergency levies gets a little complicated because you have like substitute levies. And then, so incremental levy, those don't usually come up too much, but a substitute levy, it increases revenue from the prior year's tax rate applied to the sum of non-reappraisal changes, typically with new construction.
But we don't have.
We don't have any substitute levies. All we have is emergencies only.
We talked about this as a potential last year when we were evaluating all of our
Mm-hmm.
options for consolidating, but we didn't think it was a good option for our taxpayers.
Mm-hmm.
What I think I'm taking away from this, especially having this information, is that the way that different counties in the state of Ohio and the way that different cities and districts react to this reappraisal and what's going to occur has to be different and unique to the district and the city, because the way we're funded and the way we're receiving our outside mills is not necessarily the same as other districts and other cities in the same county. And I think when we get information from the county level, what we need to understand is they're providing that general information, and it's not specific to our exact circumstance. And I
Correct.
think that's really important to consider. So the way one district reacts after, every board is having this conversation. The way that one board reacts or makes decisions is going to be different than the other because we're all funded differently.
I'd like to say that we're being very proactive in having this conversation, although I'm sure everyone will have this conversation.
It's true.
They might be
might
the
need
only
to
one
sit in on
presenting the
those.
slide deck though, but it's okay. We will skip this. This is just the substitute levy calculation. We can come visit
Yeah,
it
we don't
full
have-
circle another day.
If and when necessary.
Additional levies are new. This results in a tax increase. Renewal levies, I thought this is important, renewal levies continue the tax at the same effective rate that it was already being paid. So no increase, it's just continuing the tax.
So, Mr. Chiarinello, for all our viewers at home, last year, I guess maybe even I will say like 2 years ago, if I'm really referencing, when we voted, we were on the ballot in May, and we were on the ballot in November, and then we were on the ballot in May again with two levies together. How much additional revenue did we raise?
0.
Well, that's confusing, probably, to most people I talk to.
Well, that's why they even put the slide up there.
Thank you. You're reading my mind.
Tax reduction factors, this is going to get more into House Bill 920 and the 20-move floor. So the purpose of the tax reduction factor was to eliminate revenue growth that would otherwise result from appreciating real estate values. So, because there was historically high increases, House Bill 920 was put into place. And that constitutional amendment in 1980 created the classification system also. So 1976 was House Bill 920. So they locked it in and they said no more like free for all. As values go up, taxes go up, we're gonna lock it in.
When I
However,
was listening to the property tax, the Joint Property Tax Commission, they were talking about this and they're like, people were like, why do we think this was a good idea? Like now all these districts are falling to the 20 mil floor. And someone's like, well, because we basically said at a time when what was happening now was happening in the 70s, right? That housing values were like exploding, everything was super inflationary. And they're like, great idea. We'll just tell all the schools that they can't collect additional revenue, but we'll get them to agree to it because we'll put in this caveat that says, but once you get too low, then you can make that up. And now they're like, what the what? It's coming due. Like that promise we made to schools is coming due. And then they're like, schools, you're so mean at like wanting to collect on the bargain that really hurts you for years and years and 50 years, right? Is that fair to say?
it's been 48 years.
Yeah. So that's what I heard during the Property Tax Commission, unless I'm completely inaccurate.
No, you pass a levy, your costs go up and your revenue stays the same, which is why our revenue looks like a set of stairs. You pass one and then you're flatlined and your revenues go like this. And then once they cross, you have the alligator of death and then you have to go back for new money issue.
I hope we're gonna trademark that, the alligator of death.
I like that.
There you go.
I've never heard of anything better come out of the
Yeah.
treasurer's.
Well,
office.
referencing House Bill 920 and the
that.
20 mil floor,
Pictured it.
I don't, you may or may not
I
have
was-
this. How many times have we hit the 20 mil floor in the past?
Once you hit it, you're basically there without values going down. So we hit it barely, like skimmed it 3 years ago.
Okay.
First time ever.
First time ever was 3 years ago. And
Mhm.
then potentially,
Yeah, we skimmed it by like maybe like half a mil 3 years ago. Very small.
You anticipated hitting that again?
Well,
Not
once
that
you're
you know much, we won't know until.
once you're there, you're pretty much there. So
You're
yes,
done.
we're at the floor. At least in terms of class 1 properties. Class 2 still has about 3 or 4 mils, but also 3 years ago, those only went up 1% valuation. So unless commercial property is really seeing a resurgence, it may not get there. Because while residential home values are going up, what, 28%, or that's what the number of people have been floating out there, I don't think that is the class 2 commercial property rate. You're seeing people go remote and actually sell properties at a discount instead of, keeping the overhead. I think Progressive just sold a building, I don't know.
Yeah, or so.
Progressive sold campuses
Campuses.
nationwide.
So tax reduction factors are not designed to ensure every taxpayer within a jurisdiction pays the same taxes as a levy as in the year preceding the reappraisal we're trying to update. They're calculated each year for every levy that is subject to reduction. The calculation is based on the increase in the value of the property that was taxed by the district in the same class in both the current and preceding year, which is the carryover value. So so people are like, well, my taxes went up 50%, the school must have got that extra 50%, but if the average is 28% and Jamie's valuation went up 100 and Krista's went up 20%, even though you went up 20%, you'd actually see a reduction because you went up less than the average. It's just rebalancing, reshuffling the deck
Based upon the value of the
based on
homes.
the valuation of the home.
I really like how I didn't even have to say that time. I have no idea what that slide means, and you just told us what it meant. That was awesome.
We're going to keep going. All right, effective tax rate. Like I said, this has more to do with current operating, so we'll skip that one. Taxes are relative to value, so kind of what we said.
More expensive your home, the more you pay.
Not everyone's value changes by the same percentage. So taxes change based on your relative value to the total value of the subdivision. So the percentage of your property's value compared to the total value of the subdivision is your share of the pie. If the percentage increase in your value is greater than the average increase for the subdivision, your share of the liability increases, and your taxes will increase even though the levy will produce the same amount of revenue.
I know how to teach our students math.
So the pie stays the same. It's just your piece of the pie might shift based on how your individual property increased or decreased in relation to the whole.
But it's not necessarily like in your last example where if my house is a higher value than someone else's, it doesn't mean mine necessarily increases by more. It's relative to,
It's
okay.
based on the increase versus the average.
So again, it might not proportionally impact people, and our
Right.
lowest income earner households might be
That's
disproportionately
why it's
again
difficult to
impacted.
know how it impacts people because it's on a case-by-case basis, property-by-property basis, different subdivisions. It's
So
very,
if you're doing better, you're gonna get taxed more.
Or if your
Essentially.
house, I think
if
that's.
your
I
house
mean,
is doing
Keep your
better.
house looking like crap.
If you can, if you can live in
I
a
know.
small house.
I was
and make
just
a ton
trying
of
to- I
money,
was
it's
just
based
going
on
through
your
my
house.
mind.
Right. Like, I was just like,
How to make
I'm
my
looking the flowers out.
Well, if you know
Don't
Auditor
let any of your
Dalloway's coming,
neighbors
you
sell
just
their houses for a higher
egg your
value.
house
Right.
for a couple weeks. No, I was kidding.
Nobody
Some
sell
baloney on
any
your cars
houses,
and make
no
sure
home
that's-
sales.
All right, here's a basic tax reduction factor calculation. I know it's probably a little difficult. Let's try to zoom in a little bit.
Well, this is available, correct? Like, are
We-
we gonna
we-
post
we
this
c-
presentation or?
I
Sure.
like that idea.
We can post it.
I was just thinking that,
All
this
right.
has got to be.
This is gold.
I think it
Jamie,
really
you are
is-
enjoying this way too much.
I have to say,
I'm gonna get a
really enjoying
reprimand
it
for
as well
being too
because
enthusiastic.
One of the benefits of our current setup with the board is that we are all residents and we are all paying for the district, including
Yes.
our superintendent. And it's important for us as taxpayers to understand we are all having these conversations. Our counterparts in other elected roles are also having these conversations. And to have the equal time and narrative to tell our side is just as important as them telling theirs.
Amen.
Because they're speaking from a higher platform and not getting to the specific local circumstances that we are gonna have to make decisions from.
Yes.
So, I mean, I think it's really important to get it out there, but posting it, I think, for our community to kind of peruse and then call Mr.
Right
Chernell
there
or
on the main
email
page.
would be
Right.
the best route.
Told you I'd deliver on the finance.
We need an animator, though, to make it look like, like have Pac-Man eating the, and have the alligator and the villain and the
Yeah.
hero.
Yeah.
and-
Yes. Let's get a mock-up on that.
We need a course called
we're gonna skip
analytical
through this one
storytelling.
because this has to do with effective tax rates. So we're gonna get to some examples that
Okay,
maybe make more sense for us. So this is, once again, we're gonna skip through that. So here's an example on the effect of each levy type. So I think this is impactful. So focus on this column, this is your inside mill. And focus on this one, this is your fixed sum, which is your emergency levy.
got it.
So your assessed valuation is 35,000, which means you're you're at a $100,000 home. 10 mils on the inside, and then you have 8 mils on your emergency. So 350 for your inside, 280 for your. Let's just go straight through inside first.
And these are all per 100,000, correct?
Well, this example is yes. So this is just for a basic, just to show you what happens. So reappraisal change happens, and the increase is by 2.86%. There's also new construction of 1.43%, so the new value is 4.29% higher. So your 35,000 went up to 36,500. However, inside mills of 10 stay at 10. So the assessed value went from $350 to $365. So your value went up 4.29%. Your percentage of taxes went up 4.29%. Your tax rate stayed the same.
So what's the difference between change in taxes and change in tax rate?
Tax rate would be
Like what you
your
pay?
your
Your
tax
assessed
rate
value.
would be the reduction of your levy.
So when you say 4.9, you're not saying my taxes are going up by that. You're
That's
saying
what it-
without the
That's what-
factors.
That's what this is saying for inside mills. So this is your taxes are going up 4.29.
Okay.
And this is inside mill. For fixed sum levy, same thing happens, $280. You have the same increases because you're only going to be able to generate $280. You can't generate more because remember, it's an emergency levy.
So the percentage doesn't matter, it's a dollar amount.
So your effective mills needed to be reduced from 8 to 7.67 to
Yeah.
ensure you only generate $280 because your amount that you collect is frozen. So while your value changed 4.29%, the amount of taxes you paid changes 0. But your change in your tax rate right here went down 4.11%.
Oh.
So you're saying the increase in the taxes that I pay is a result of the funds that the county holds and distributes? It's not based on the voted funds, the emergency, because the emergency funds
Are
stay.
frozen, correct.
Yeah, so in reality, my increased taxes are not coming to the school, they're going to that big pot that gets divvied up, and we only get 4.2% of that, or 4.2 mils.
We could say that they're definitely not factored or contributed by, or impacted by emergency levies.
Okay.
Emergency levies are frozen and they do not increase by $1.
Okay.
So that's why I wanted to show these two, because and we have to understand, inside mills are small. There are not a lot of them.
Yeah.
So while that might, freak you out a little bit, like it's going up, percentage for percentage, there's only 10 of them total. But in Lake County, there are only 9 of them because that was a decision that the County Budget Commission did.
So other districts that are not primarily funded by emergency levies will have a different outcome after this reappraisal than we will.
Well, they would fall under this fourth bucket, and you would see, just going down here, they would actually see an increase of 1.39% in how much they generated, and the reduction of their rate would only go down 2.78, which is very similar to what a substitute levy would do, because they both capture new construction. So new construction, would that be that 1.43%? And they actually can capture new construction, but emergency levies cannot.
So even when we hit the 20 mil floor, the emergency levies are still never gonna collect more than they were voted on or that they show here. So like their effective rate will just keep going down essentially as property values go up because they're
Yes.
less of a piece of the pie.
Yes, they're just frozen.
So I've read some different literature and heard some different things that the schools are gonna come into a windfall of money because of the reappraisal and because our district has so many emergency levies, obviously, we're gonna be impacted differently. So that windfall may not be perceptually the same as maybe districts funded by other levy types.
We're all different, but.
Yeah.
But
so
you're gonna show us the estimated collection, right, at
Yep,
some point
that's-
in these slides?
That's, we're going, when we go back to a regularly scheduled program. We will, let's see, I'm gonna,
9 PM.
What time is it? What time is intermission?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, can we have an
Halftime.
intermission?
all right, well, let
Ready
me
to-
just zoom over to 20 mil floor.
Boom.
Perfect. Well, I
Okay.
think this is where we need to be because ultimately we're going to have constituents coming and asking and having, we're gonna have
So
conversations.
this is
so-
more meaningful to
Yeah.
our district, because we are at the floor.
Although I appreciate it's a lesson.
So what is the floor / a guarantee? So this is stating that every school district is guaranteed an effective rate equal to 2%, 20 mils, assuming 20 mils has been authorized. So the floors are beneficial to taxing authorities because they freeze effective mills at the floor level, causing a revenue increase during reappraisals and triennial updates. So that is what we have just experienced. Like I said, very, very small 3 years ago, and it'll be more impactful this time.
But
And-
like what I heard about the 20 mil floor of like kind of like the concept of how it's designed is the state was like, you local property taxpayers at least have to pay 20% of what your properties are valued at for your public education. Like we're saying that you at least have to do that. And that's like a state level decision that they made. And that's what this 20 mil floor like means in layman's terms, right?
Yeah, it's all baked in the Constitution.
Okay, thank you.
So how is the 20 mil 20 mil guarantee calculated? This includes your inside mills and excludes your emergency levies and your permanent improvement levies. So back when House Bill 920 was passed, there was some effective mills that every school was currently operating at, and they froze that, and that is your 1976 outside mills. So those mills have now been reduced so far down there at 15.2. And now they're stuck at 15.2. So 15.2 plus the 4.8 is now the 20. And then you have the emergency levies over on the side. The 20 mil floor adjustment is annual and not cumulative. Values increase from reappraisal changes, increase the base revenue that was voted, fixed rates will produce. So if the values decrease in the future to reappraisal changes, the base will not decrease, instead the effective rate will increase to produce the base value. So, but since values are basically going up, not down, that is why we'll probably be, once you're on the floor, you kind of stay on the floor because rates are going up, or values are going up. We're gonna zoom in on this just to kind of show what a 20 mil floor calculation looks like, because this is meaningful to us. So you kind of see District 1 has 4 mills, and they have 17 on the outside, so they have 21 total. District 2, 6, also has 17, they have 23 total. You can see kind of what they generate. They each generate base year of taxes this one has $210,000, and this one has $230,000. They both have an appraised value of $11 million. That the new value is $11 million. They were at 10. So the outside mills have now. This is how you properly calculate an increase on 20 mil calculation. I've seen some people try to do different calculations, but this is the only way to properly calculate 20 mil floors. So you have to take the initial outside millage, and get the new effective. So the 17 was dropped down to 15.45, same here, 17 was dropped to 15.45. So this plus this is really 19.45, so they had to revise the 15.45 to 16, because you can't be below 20. So that 0.55 is now an increase. Over here, this number plus this number is only 21.45, so it can be 21.45. So now you take that new rate, and instead of generating 170,000 up here, it's now at 176, and this one stays at 170. This is from, the next layer is from inside mills, because they're frozen. So that 40 goes to 44, 60 goes to 66. So District 1 gained an additional $10,000, whereas District 2 only gained an additional $6,000. But, so that is how the 20 mil floor happens. So if this rate were to be calculated and say, for us, it drops to 14, it would be reset back up to 15.2 based on the calculation, which would result in an increase. But this is on the 20 mil floor calculation.
So will this be in our curriculum next year?
Oh, we can try.
We do have that financial literacy course.
We could ask
Get them
that,
started
Katie.
in kindergarten.
All right.
200 level.
So I just wanted to show you how that, like I said, it's complicated, but like I said, I've seen people try their best to determine how to do 20 mil floor calculation, and you kind of have to follow this calculation.
That was actually probably the first time I've looked at this so many times and heard it.
Yeah.
That was the first time I really understood it, because
Yeah.
you went line by line. So
Yeah.
that was extremely helpful, and I feel like we could even cut this down into like a 2-minute explanation and
Oh, boy.
repurpose it.
There you go,
With an alligator.
with an alligator.
We need
Chomp,
the
chomp.
alligator with sound effects.
All right, so
Yeah.
these are just different
And we gotta
snippets.
throw the Pac-Man in there. Walk away.
We'll skip through here. We're gonna skip through shifting. Skip. I thought this was something important. 403 of the 611 school districts are at the 20 mil floor.
Which goes back to what I said, is like, we're all like, yes, we finally got to the finish line. We've been waiting and waiting for
Yeah.
you to give us a little bit of inflationary growth. And they're like, oh, well, too many of you have gotten here at the same exact time.
And then now an additional 145 are within 20% of the 20 mil floor. So almost all school districts are at the 20 mil floor. So this is not a Willoughby East Lake thing.
Yeah.
It's
There you
not-
go.
No fault of our
State.
own.
No
So I
fault.
We
want-
played by the rules.
Yes,
Okay, so I didn't want anyone to think that this
Yes.
is some dirty trick that Willoughby East
No.
Lake did to get to the 20 mil
Yeah.
floor. This is a statewide thing
Yes.
for all school districts in the state of Ohio. So I thought that was
Good to know.
important for him to put there, and just to show that this is much bigger than just us. Because sometimes we forget, we're one of 611 school districts.
In the grand scheme of things, it seems kind of like just an inflationary tax.
Mhm.
Like just
And
just to do.
that was the
And
last
it's
major slide
for
I
us,
wanted to
but-
talk about on this one. So we're gonna get back to a regularly scheduled program.
Yay. You did a great job, though. No, I'm really glad that we had that. I do believe that there are some really great
Five-year
nuggets
forecast.
of knowledge
Oh,
that could
right.
be
Hey, Nick,
shared.
good job.
You're not even done, and everyone's clapping. This is
I
like
know,
the
but
most
that-
well-received
Intermission,
finance
intermission
report.
celebration.
We're getting to the good stuff now. So now that you know about taxes,
That
and you're-
wasn't even
and
the
you're
good
all
stuff.
experts,
Perfect expert.
now we can kind of talk about what was in the 5-year forecast in May. And because we didn't really know, there was so many talks about changes at the State House and, raising the floor and doing this and doing that. We put it back at 17.5, which is where it was 3 years ago. It was a $4.6 million valuation increase, or $80.50 per $100,000 in valuation.
What did you just say?
So that this increase of 17.5% would result in an increase to the district of $4.6 million, because we're at the 20 mil floor.
You're saying that's what you forecasted.
This is what I
We will
forecasted.
receive
Yes.
as a result of the sexennial reappraisal?
Yes.
Okay.
And so this $4.6 million valuation increase would cost someone in a $100,000 home $80.50 per year. So just so we know, like, what the number would be.
That's what you were forecasting based on all of the information and data you have. That's what you based our financial picture on.
Yes. So, and because it's, when you see millions of dollars, it's difficult to remember what that means to run the school district. So at the very end, I added a line, it's called days cash. So I don't know what your comfort level is in your own personal home, but, would you be comfortable with only a week's worth of cash in the savings account?
For 6 months.
Or 6 months, or 3 months, or 2 months, what's the number to feel comfortable with, like, here's my emergency fund, here's my savings account, we feel good, it's here.
Well, what does Willoughby Eastlake say that is?
Well, the state
We-
gives us a number that we have to adhere to, don't.
No. You have to
So
have.
how have
you
we
have to
made
have a-
decisions in the past?
You have to have a cash balance policy to say,
Yeah.
this is the number, and we do not have a cash balance policy.
But we do have within, never mind, we're not gonna go there, just keep going.
So, okay, are you gonna recommend one at the end of
Well,
this?
we'll
Is
talk
that-
about what that
okay.
looks like if we wanted to go that route. So this
So
year,
excited
we
for
are
this.
projected to end with 105 days of cash, which is 3.5 months.
Which means if like we got no more incoming money,
We can
we
keep the
could,
lights on for 3.5 months,
like not even a full school year.
not even a school year.
That
One,
seems,
basically one quarter.
Right. So we could keep the lights on, keep the district going for 3.5 months. Next year, 3 months and a week. Then it goes down to under 3 months, then 2 months, then 1 month. And this is with the forecast that we approved in May. Now, I want to just do 2 more simulations real quick. First one is if we did the 28% that the county has been talking about. That would result in $7.3 million increase, or $128 per $100,000 evaluation. So you can see we're still at the same 105 for this year because it doesn't impact this year. Next year we go up to 100, and then it starts to fall down again to 94, 76, and 52 in the last year. Now, let's say we're like, hey, we don't need the money. We're good with 60 days, not 100 days or something. What happens if we gave all the money back? Now, remember, the richer the community looks, the less the state will give you. So the state's already dialing back how much they're going to give us based on the values increasing. So you
are
could-
they dialing back the vouchers?
I think those are going the wrong way.
Jamie.
So
No
you
bunny trails here.
could, so you could see fiscal 25, we're still solid at 86, but then fiscal 26, we're below 2 months. Fiscal 27, we're at 2 weeks, and then fiscal 28, we are a month in the hole. And that's if we, if we did not hit the 20 mil floor, this would be where the district would be.
So I can see why they took out all those loans.
So we would be looking at a new money issue in a year.
How do we get to a point where we can kind of be good, consistently, forever? Like,
Well, there you go.
forever.
Now, there's the question.
So, Krista brought up a great point about, what's the number? And so that's what cash balance policies create, and it's the board that dictates, hey, this is the number we feel we need to be at to be good in order to the wheels don't fall off. We break the cycle. We're not doom and gloom. We're not riffing or letting go 90 people, cutting programs. So this could be expressed in the form of a percentage of revenues versus expenses, true days cash. I feel like true days cash kind of is easy to relate to, or you could do true months cash if you'd rather see it in months versus days, or a whole dollar amount. And you could do one with a low cash balance and a low point and a high point.
So when we get too high, we need to,
Yeah, so here's a
we're
low.
being greedy.
So here's a low point and a high point cash balance policy. So it says, the low point is 90 days, 3 months. It says we need to have at least 3 months of cash throughout the forecast. But however, if we were to exceed 150, so go over 5 months, then the superintendent, giving you some homework, has to prepare a plan for the expenditure of the excess funds on one or more of the deliverables of the strategic plan. So you're taking those funds and you are putting them to work to advance the strategic plan of the district. So it's not just like you're sitting there with the money and like being greedy with it, you're actually making a plan on what to do with those.
Now, could that go towards paying off debt as well?
If that's part of the strategic plan,
We could do that, or couldn't we even go so far as to either specify or maybe specify by way of the strategic plan that we need to make these permanent improvements on our buildings, right?
So we have that bucket, remember and in that bucket is where I think those kind of conversations would live.
so it says this plan, so this is just an example policy. The plan must be approved by the Board of Education and cannot result in the general fund balance falling below the 90 days. So you can't go below the floor, because we said we have to at least have that, 90-day cushion in any year of the rolling 5-year forecast. Now, this is an example. We can create it however we want. But remember, so this policy says they need at least 90 days in any year of the 5-year forecast, even with a 28% increase. In 27 and 28, we are below that.
So let me ask you this. So this is like a 28% increase, which I heard the auditor today say in a county very similar to Lake County, that even with the effective rate was 28, that their actual rate was 9%. With the floor, it's probably higher than that. So we're probably not even getting this full amount. But let's just say we do best case scenario. If we had the policy you just showed us, what would that tell us to do based on the slide that you just showed us?
We'd have to get a levy, some type of levy going.
So in order to maintain a cash reserve of 90 days, the board affirms that tax levies should be pursued and/or the district's finances otherwise managed to ensure the general fund balance, meets 90 days. So we'd have to come up with a plan to either generate more revenue or reduce our expenses to get to the 90.
So do you feel like is this slide I know you said it's an example, is this your recommendation for what the lower end and higher end should be? Or do you have like a different recommendation than this?
It's all about comfortability, but this is, like I said, so this is the one we approved. The very low end, we're at 30. And the year before that, 61. With the 28% increase, 76 and 52.
Still not
What
bad.
So you could, for the first 2 years, you could say the first 2 years have to be 90 days. You could say the next 2 must be 60 and the third could be 30. You could taper it down, or, it's workable like
How
that.
do we get to a point to where we don't have to worry about these situations happening again? How do we, as Willoughby Eastlake, become, for lack of better words, self-sustaining for years and years to come?
From the existing set of funds that we receive to never increase.
Have to do anything ever again?
Well, I guess I would say,
no
can
new
you,
levies.
No, nothing ever, how do we get to that point?
that would be
Can we
like
get to, is that,
freezing your wages as an employee and saying you'll never get a raise again. And you have to live
Yeah.
off of your wages today in 30 years.
I mean, unfortunately, the state did not design the system to work the way that you're asking. So I think the true answer to your question is the state would have to redo school funding
Right.
to achieve what you're
Yeah.
saying, because they designed it where we have to, a typical school district, I think, has to go back to the ballot every, 4 to 6 years or something at least, like in a good case scenario, in a bad situation, maybe more. Is that fair?
Somewhere, case by case, depends on how big the levy, the last one was, but yes, typically around every 5 years or so, they may be coming back for new money issue.
I think what the cash balance policy does from the standpoint of us trying to be proactive is we could start having conversations with our community during a campaign. We wouldn't have to react. It wouldn't be a fire drill. It would rather be a plan. And then we could invite the community into that plan to build awareness. This is where we're at, this is what we have, what do you want to continue? And I think myself as a taxpayer, if I knew I had 2 to 3 years and the district's asking for more and my taxes were going to increase, I could put together a plan and be like, I don't think we can afford this if it goes up. So, maybe we need to start looking to live elsewhere. But I think ultimately, this allows us to engage in conversations sooner and stop having fire drills about our finances. So,
Yeah, to weigh in, I think I agree. There's a opportunity we have right now, this moment, right? This runway we have right now to be thoughtful about our future. And if we continue engaging in these really important conversations, we could set a generation up for a really good path. And leaving the campsite better than we found it is always the greatest charge of leadership. So appreciate that we've had this really in-depth conversation tonight. It's
And it's not
awesome.
even that deep right now.
I did notice that Mr. Chernillo seemed to get more excited as the presentation went
He
on.
did.
I started
I
losing
just
it.
want to point that out.
click it.
Uh,
What's next? I want to know.
This is just another cash balance policy. This one's 105 days. So like I said, this one is the current year and the next 3-year projected. So you can structure it however you want. You could say this year and next year has to be this number, the 2
Okay.
years after that have to be a different number, the last year could be a different number. So it's not like flat 90 all the way across. You could taper it down or however you want.
Can I ask a question?
And that
Can you
was
do
it.
something for us for a future meeting? I don't know if it would be like a work session or a regular meeting, but you know how you did when we were looking at the levies and you made like recommendations for like option 1, option 2, option 3, and then like explained why those were the 3 options and then your final recommendation? Could you do that with some potential cash balance policies and say like the advantage of one over the other so we don't have to, while our minds are melting together right now, make a final decision?
I think it's definitely worth talking about. I think it really comes down to just the comfortability of the board, because if I say, we really need 100 days of cash on hand, and you're like, I think we're good with 60. So that's really where do you all feel the floor should be? Like, where you could just take the one policy and just like, hey, we like the 90 and we like the 150, and you live
The
in
number
that.
that's been in my head
you
is
live in
the
that
full
range.
entire school year. And I feel like that might be too high at this point.
Just because I don't think our community
Right.
can tolerate it, even though
Right.
that's what I would say is like a sound financial planner.
What I would like to make a
Entire school year.
recommendation, so you're part of OASBO, do you have the ability to maybe solicit from current treasurers to say who has a current cash balance policy that's been put into practice and leveraged? And
That's
can we
right.
maybe get some use cases?
That's right, cherry pick these from. So
Maybe examples from how the board used this policy or why or when. So maybe actual examples. This is what happened with this district and that's why this policy really helped them for future planning. So maybe the districts that have these, even if you want to get those names, I'd be more than happy to reach out and be like, hey, can you give us some historical context as to when you leaned into this policy and how it helped
To-
the district?
To that point, just to elaborate, so when I was at, Stacy and I were at Board Leadership Institute, one of the sessions I went to specifically was about why it's imperative for boards who are proactive to have a cash balance policy. The OSBA recommended model policy, I think I shared it with you, Mr. Chernello, and it might even be this one, it was the one from Lakewood School District, was
Okay.
their kind of recommendation, which I believe reads almost like this, unless, is that the one you took, Mr. Chernello?
I guess I just want to.
it was in the OASBO created something called the white paper. I don't know if you ever see the testimony. Katie's always holding
Yeah,
white
yeah.
paper. It's all in there, and it has to do with just best practices for cash.
Okay.
But I think this is either Lakewood or Lakota, because they both have a floor and a ceiling. So they have to have a bottom where they say, we need this,
Okay.
but then we promise we won't go above a certain number. And if you do, then you have to have a plan on what you're gonna do with it, not just hold the money.
Fair enough.
But like I said, I could definitely do a little bit more research, send the white paper out, send this presentation out. You guys can all look at that. I'll try to ask some school districts that have actually had to lean into the policy, if they hit the floor or if they hit the ceiling and what that looked like. And then go
You
from
know,
there.
that cash balance policy example, the way you explain it, it really, really does make sense and is so necessary. But the particulars, we could use a little bit more help on with the particulars with that, for us to feel more confident about how to go about it. I don't think it's a matter of if, it's a matter of how right now. For me personally, that's how I feel.
Like, it'd be nice to be at the 90 for the whole 5 years, but
Right.
this district has always been a house of cards, so maybe, you know, wading into it and tapering it down, and then maybe as we start going along, we can maybe hit the 90 across all the years, but this district has never been flush with cash, and any, you know, windfall would just be sustaining the district from, you know, being forced back onto the ballot.
Crazy
Now,
idea.
I was just,
Go ahead.
I was just about to ask that. Do you see that happening, us being put back on the ballot before 2028? I hate that. I just want to ask
For renewal levies?
before renewal levy. Do you, like, worst case scenario, is it possible? Is there a small glimpse of a percentage that it is possible?
Wait, I don't think you guys are using the same terminology, because for renewal, the answer is no, but are you asking for any money?
Like emergency.
Like
Like
any,
a
any
brand new
type
money
of
levy.
back to the ballot, anything. Not, well.
Renewals
besides-
for,
renewal's not gonna come
sure,
till
no,
2028.
yeah.
Well, like
But
I said,
any other type of levy
it
coming
would-
up over the next,
we talked about how a permanent improvement levy is not, you know, our permanent improvement fund is not sustainable. You know, if that's a
Right.
initiative of the board to say, we
Hey,
have
we need
buildings
this.
without air conditioning, we have roofs that are falling apart, we need a PI levy to fully support the facilities of the district. If that was the goal, then that would be an increase. But so for me to say we won't be back on the ballot depends on really what the mission and the vision and what you guys want to do.
And the cash balance policy,
And
right?
the
Because
cash
our
balance
cash
policy,
balance
yeah.
policy will lead us to either make those decisions.
and
So-
fully funding it.
Yeah, so I was gonna say, does it make sense then for like two board members to go offline with Mr. Chernello to work on a recommendation to the board, since like there is an education piece and whatnot, just to make sure we're doing this in a timely way? I don't know. Maybe my,
It's up to you guys unless, I'd say probably have something in place, the sooner the better is probably good practice. And then from there, we could always give it to the finance committee and then they could fine tune it and make recommendations if they don't believe the policy is the best for the district. But to at least put something in place is probably good practice.
okay, so you wanna follow up with a recommendation then? Is that?
Sure, I can send out some recommendations and if,
He's like,
I'll provide a recommendation and from there you guys can let me know if this is something that we need to keep ironing out. If it is, you can assign board members and we can try to iron it out.
Stacy's
Thank
ready
you.
to talk.
Appreciate
I
it.
feel smarter than I did before.
I'd like to move on to 7A.
But
12
wait, no, I'm
hours
joking.
later.
Do I hear a motion to adjourn to executive session for appointment and/or employment of a public employee? No action will be taken after the session.
Madam President, I motion to adjourn to executive session.
Do I hear a second?
Madam President, I second.
Discussion? Mr. Tarnello?
Mrs. Bear,
Yes.
Mr. DeFranco,
Absolutely.
Mrs. Verdi,
Yes.
Mrs. Schatzman,
Yes.
Mrs. Menser.
Yes.
We're in executive session at 8:18 PM.
So what I was